It is my immense pleasure to welcome back Konstantin to the channel. He's one of the most respected voices on YouTube about what is happening inside Russia, and of course, the Russian mindset that has led to Putin's full-scale war. Konstantin is an extremely well-known YouTuber whose channel Inside Russia comments insightfully on Russia's descent into authoritarianism. And I'm sure many of you will know this is not our first conversation. We've had numerous conversations before. So if you enjoy this, if you get value from this more particularly, then please do go and check out our previous conversations and definitely check you're subscribed to the channel. There's all sorts of algorithmic weirdness going on. I wouldn't want you to miss out on the amazing guests who give up their time to appear on the channel. And also, as I do now in each of the episodes, I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who supports me, who supports Konstantin, who uses things like Buy Me a Coffee and so on to help us continue the work that we are doing. It is, as Konstantin will agree, a full-time job. Thank you also to everyone who has been supporting the documentary film that we're trying to fundraise. We'll be putting regular updates on that onto the channel. The good news is we have now pretty much reached the initial target, so we can at least kick off the filming process this year, which is fantastic news. But I will share more details of that with the audience as soon as we have them. Konstantin, welcome back to the channel.
Jonathan, thank you so very much. It's fantastic to be back. I always look for our conversations, our next conversation. I enjoy them very much. And let me congratulate you on becoming a real mighty powerful force on YouTube. You know, your channel is growing, your guests are fantastic. More people are interested to hear what they have to say. So congratulations.
Thank you so much. That's so very generous and kind of you. I do have a certain call it imposter syndrome, but I do go to a lot of events now, and I'm constantly surprised, how many people at these events tune into the channel and get value from it. And that, of course, helps because, as you know, I mean, you commit a huge amount of time to your channel, crafting the content. This is not something that just sort of happens easily. It requires a tremendous amount of work on both our parts. So it's great to know there's some appreciation for it. Well, we're going to talk
We'll
about a
go
couple.
through that syndrome at some point.
Yes, I'll grow out of it at some point. Um, well, I don't want to sort of overhype the delicacy of the Russian economy, but we did hear an absolutely extraordinary leaked audio last week, and this was the deputy managing director of Russian Railways, one of the largest commercial entities in the country. This was Sergei Kobzyev. He was quoted as saying that the Russian rail network is on the precipice of total collapse. That seems to be extreme, but I wonder whether this might be symptomatic not just of the railways, but of the wider economy. I know we've been talking about this for 2 years, but it does seem that there is a certain inflection point at this in the Russian economy, and the pressures are building.
Well, like you mentioned, we have been talking about it for 2 years now, that Russian economy is not well, it's in trouble. I call this situation the economic tsunami, and it's really an economic perfect storm. And what is happening with Russian railways is full-blown crisis. This is just a small part of what's happening in Russia. Let's look at the bigger picture. You know, different industries are going through similar crisis. Coal mining industry, natural gas industry, aviation industry, well, airlines, railroads, um, pretty much everything except for military industrial complex. But military industrial complex in Russia is also slowing down, and there are signs that it will start shrinking, or actually has started shrinking. So there is a crisis, and it's true. I believe that. But it's not the first time I heard publicly someone of high caliber speaks of the crisis. Oleg Deripaska, Russian oligarch, who relies on railroads, Russian railroads. He is the king of aluminum in Russia. and then he paid attention to of Russian people to the problems with railroads. If I'm not mistaken, he said that right now the average speed of cargo in Russia going on railroad is 5 kilometers per hour. Now look at Russia's map and see how large it is, and 5 kilometers per hour, and guess how long it takes for cargo to get delivered from one point of Russia to another point. And of course, military cargo, military transport is given the priority, I assume. Okay, but it's hurting everyone else.
And I get a sense of that. I mean, I traveled to Irkutsk, and I guess the trains must have been going about sort of 50 miles an hour or so. And of course, that took 5 days and 5 nights to get from Moscow to Irkutsk. 5 miles an hour is inconceivable, and how you can keep sort of industries going. But of course, from our Western economic point of view, one assumes that then they'll go bankrupt. But that's not necessarily what's happening. What we're seeing, and I love your point of view because we've touched on this before, is that we're seeing accelerated nationalism for those industries that are crucial to the military industrial complex, or things like aviation. They become commercially unviable, but the state then forces, local banks to buy them out and subsidizes it, or they directly get taken over by the state. What is going to be the implications of this accelerating return to a Soviet centrally planned economy? Because at the moment, Russia spent a number of years moving away from that. It seems to me it's a very risky and dangerous process to re-Sovietize the Russian economy.
Um, Absolutely right. There's re-Sovietization of Russian economy going on, and it's not there yet because there's still private business. It's allowed, and there are quite a few companies, and they're working on quasi-free markets. It's not really free any longer, but there are still markets. But the vector of movement is towards the state nationalizing and owning big enterprises, big companies in pretty much all industries. And when the state owns a company, that company is not operated in efficient way because the government, it's not private company anymore. Okay, the government delegates to government officials to run companies, and usually government officials have different goals. They don't care about the efficiency of business. Okay, they care about something else.
Adding another floor to the dacha, I imagine, is the kind of
That's one
thing.
of the things. Sure, basically, there are two main goals. First is, of course, the flow of money into their pockets, and that money should not remain in Russia. They should be transferred to Dubai, to London, to Miami, to Nice, to France, anywhere, but out of Russia. So, and then hopefully the Russian officials would follow the money some years later with their families and live happily ever after. And then the second goal is to stay in their seats, sit in their seats, to stay in their positions for as long as possible. And there's basically, these are two drivers of Russian officials. But the companies, they start losing money, but they are state-owned now. So what do the companies do? The management, the CEO, he goes to the state and says, you know what, I need a subsidy. I need a bailout. And he gets a bailout. And that's pretty much it. So it leads to great inefficiency in the economy. It's definitely not sustainable. And it also leads to drying up a federal budget because the taxpayers end up paying for everything. They end up picking up the bill. But their resources are also limited. So what I think happens in the future is these big companies, railroads, airlines, aluminum extracting and producing companies, metallurgical plants, and so forth, They all will be owned by the state, directly or indirectly, and they will be subsidized. They will be inefficient, but working, producing some kind of output. Okay. But what happens to people? Their living standard will be so low. It's going to be comparable, perhaps even worse than back in the USSR.
And these are industries, I assume they would be nationalizing or taking over that have some strategic link to the military or security sector. I read a report, though, that there are other sectors that are really feeling the pain. So I can see how aviation would be considered a strategic industry, but something like 1 in 5 car showrooms are on the verge of bankruptcy. When it comes to these industries that serve domestic product, which have really no connection to the military industrial complex, are they likely just to let these businesses kind of go to the wall?
I just had an extended discussion with my wife, who's an expert on a Russian business. This morning we discussed this topic exactly. Most likely, those businesses will not go bankrupt, but they will be bought for pennies on dollar by the government officials, the KGB officials, everyone who has money in Russia. And those people who have money are war profiteers connected to the military industrial complex in one way or another. So they'll be just vacuum cleaning all the assets for peanuts. And I think this is what's going to happen. There are examples already. Russia's largest winemaker. I mean, does wine making have anything to do with military industrial complex? No. But the winemaking company was in Kuban near Krasnodar was nationalized. Okay, it's not like it was privatized back in the USSR and the court found out that it was wrong privatization back in 93, something like that. No, no, no. It was created in 2007. Now it belongs to the government, and the next step is the government will sell it to a new owner or will lease it to a new owner. So I think this is what's going to happen. So there's a great передел, what's in Russian is called передел, restructuring of Russian economy will be going on. But the end result will, another great example is a French company, Danone, Russia's largest dairy producer. It was simply stolen from the owners and given to the Chechens. Okay. And 6 months later, they're having big troubles with output. They're shrinking their production because of mismanagement. And this is what awaits other businesses as well. They will become greatly inefficient because in order for them to be efficient, they have to be owned by someone, and they have to be managed by owners, and if they're owned by the state, well, I could go on forever, but there's
Yeah.
a great book. It's called Atlas Shrugged. Read that book and you'll get all the answers. And this is what's happening in Russia right now.
And a lot of the most competent entrepreneurs have left the country over the last 2 decades. One thinks about Evgeny Chichvarkin and others. And there's a topic that I don't think we really discussed too much because I think it fell between two of our episodes. But this is that process that you described there of переграбление, and Wildberries is a kind of classic example of that. It's actually a business that didn't exist before. It's a high-tech business. It's one of the few highly profitable and successful businesses. I don't know whether behind the scenes it's run along Western management lines, but it's certainly, one of the juiciest businesses in the country. And now you have thugs and oligarchs basically staging shootouts to try and gain control of this asset. Now, we talked about this a year ago. We predicted this would happen. I think Wildberries is one of the first really huge examples of that.
Oh, Jonathan, I really like that you brought this idea that Russian businessmen have been leaving Russia. Who is John Galt? That's the question in Atlas Shrugged book. That was written by Ayn Rand, who was born in Russian Empire in Odessa and then immigrated to the USA. Anyway, in that book, John Galt and other business people, they're leaving this sadistic socialistic state to establish their own land, their own country with capitalism. Okay, and this is what's happening with Russia right now. Good businessmen are leaving. There are many places in the world where you can go to and do business. Definitely not Russia. Yes, and of course, we. I have a feeling that everything that we have discussed in the past 2 years is coming true now, and Wildberry is also a prime example of what's happening.
And another topic we've touched on, and again, we kind of predicted that certain people within the so-called leader hierarchy would start falling out with each other. And we've got Chemizov, who is the head of one of the largest military industrial concerns. In fact, he's pretty much the oligarch that controls almost the entire military industrial sector. He's been openly arguing with Elvira Nabiulina. It's also reported that Chemizov is trying to get messages through to Putin, warnings about not just the state of the economy, but how the military industrial complex is going to be non-commercially viable if the current trends continue. The question here, and I think we both know the answer, how far can the most senior oligarchs within the system get messages through to Putin, and in fact, change anything about the course that Russia's on, which seems to be almost entirely directed by not just the war in Ukraine, but the global war against democracy, if I can give it that sort of grand kind of idea there.
I think that Chemizov is one of top three most powerful people in Russia right now. And I think he has direct access to Vladimir Putin. Do you know who Chemizov is?
I don't know much about his backstory. I just know what he's in charge of currently.
I will give you a very brief backstory. He was a KGB officer, and he was sent as an operative, as an agent to East Germany. And he was stationed there for a few years at the same time as Vladimir Putin was based there. And
Buddies in Dresden.
apartments
Yeah.
were right next to each other. So the doors to their apartments were, facing each other. And they were friends. They made friends there. They hang out with families by themselves. They spent a few years together. And that was a friendship born a long time ago, way back in East Germany, and they're still the best friends. I think Chemizov has very direct access to Putin, and his messages not only get through, Putin makes his decisions based on what Chemizov proposes. Okay. And you're absolutely right. There is tension between Chemizov and Nabiulina. And that's a huge, it's two different clans, power clans in Russia. And I think Chemizov will eventually win. Nabiulina will be fired. That's the best case scenario for her. And Chemizov is proposing to lower the key interest rate, and I think that he will win. Somebody else will lead central bank in the future, perhaps in the very near future, and they will start making money more accessible to companies. And that will lead to hyperinflation, but Chemizov doesn't really care about that.
And that was going to be the next question there. I think it looks from the last 6 month figures, and Nabiulina's main task that she's been, laser focused on is keeping a lid on inflation, but it looks like it is accelerating out of control. At the same time, you talked about the sort of stagnation of many industries, certainly consumer ones, but also stagnation of the largest military industrial complex as well. So the term here, and this was applied to Britain in the 70s when we had some really major economic issues, and that is stagflation. And it is the worst possible combination of galloping inflation, but also stagnating industries. It looks very much to me, from the figures at least, that Russia is sort of heading in that direction, despite still getting quite substantial oil and gas revenues in, there are some major systemic problems. If Chemizov doesn't really care about inflation, and Nabiulin is pushed out of the way, that could well be the trigger for this to accelerate even further, I guess.
I made a live stream on my channel a few weeks ago, and I believe I was the first person in Russia who brought up this word stagflation. I remember this term, very specific term that not too many people knew until a few weeks ago before Chemizov brought it up. I warned everyone of Russia going into stagflation a couple of weeks before he had his famous address to the Russian parliament. But I remember that word explanation of that economic situation from my first year of economics school. Stagflation in the United States in the 70s was given to us as an example of what can happen to economy. And, I think it was like in mid 90s that I learned about it and I forgot about it. And then I brushed the dust off this term recently. I started seeing the signs, okay? And Russia is not going into stagflation. In my opinion, it's there. And it's going to worsen at time. Elvira Nabiulina has been doing exactly what you said. She's been trying to keep inflation under control. But she can't. She can't. She's been using the tools available to her through the central bank, through the emission not emission, the control of money mass. Well, the thing is, she's trying to dry Russian economy up of money. But at the same time, there are other Russian agencies, Ministry of Finance, that is flooding Russian economy with money. It's the same thing as the Titanic hits the iceberg and the water starts gushing in. And all of a sudden, some sailors come out and say, hey, we have pumps. We can take that water, pump it out. And they start doing that, okay? And it stabilizes the situation. But then at the other end of Titanic, there are other sailors that say, you know what? We really like making holes in the hull. And they start breaching the hull more and more and more. And this is what's happening. And at the end, Titanic goes down. And this is exactly what's happening in Russian economy. Nabiulina is trying to take the money out of the economy. And the military industrial, the government is paying everyone 3 million rubles to whoever wants to sign up and go fight in Ukraine and stuffing money into their pockets. And Russian government is pumping money into the military industrial complex at unprecedented rates. And this is what is driving the inflation up. So, but Elvira Nabiulina, by increasing the key interest rate, is basically killing Russian economy. It sends the economy into the depression, recession. Okay, and this is exactly what's happening. So she can't win. It's like worse and worse, lose and lose situation.
It's a little bit like, well, we had quantitative easing during, recent economic crises, including COVID, where, of course, the government pumped money in. But I think in Western economies, there was always a calculation that if you pump money in here, you're going to have to take it out somewhere else. So that would be in lower sort of social spending, higher inflation for a few years. So there's this calculation that, yes, you have to take these measures now, but you're going to feel the pain later. And those are kind of built into future budgets and so on. I'm guessing they're not doing this kind of thinking, although there is some evidence that actually some wages are not being paid, some veterans not being paid, widows are not being paid. And also, there was a story about health workers in Moscow who have got a 30% cut in their salaries. So it seems that somebody in the system is trying to mop up all of this sort of liquidity that's being pumped in. And that pain is going to start hitting individual salaries. It's going to hit investment in infrastructure. It's at this point, apparently, the investment or the costs to the economy of the war sector have, for the first time since the Soviet era, they're actually higher than combined social spending, health spending, etc.
But you've got to look at Russia's economy and at any economy as a whole, not just at the military industrial complex. Okay, look at the military industries, and at the same time look at what is happening with the civic industries. Okay, and they're not growing, they're in huge decline and recession. Construction companies are on the verge of big busts right now, and there isn't, well, there is still enough money to pay everyone, but this is exactly what I've been talking for the past 2 years. They're increasing spendings so much, but eventually they're going to run out of money, and they're out of money now. It has taken them 2 years to run out, and this is it. This is the day X. What do you do when you run out of money? You start cutting your costs, right? You start, well, perfect example. I'm going to make a stream or a news update on this situation. There is Russia's premier cancer treatment center, cancer hospital in Moscow, Center Blakhina. You know, many people have had cancer in families and friends, and I've been to that place a couple times. None of from my family was a patient, but I was helping my friend. His mom had cancer, and she was treated there. The best Russia has to offer. Okay, the best doctors, the best equipment. Patients who get there, they have a chance. In other parts of Russia, the chances are much lower. All of a sudden, now the news comes out that all doctors, all medical, non-medical personnel, their salaries are cut by 30%. And they start complaining, and doctors start quitting. Now, why does the government do that? For one simple reason: it can't afford. It will be cutting salaries of all non-military, non-essential personnel. Okay, and this is where Russia is standing right now.
And the construction industry, I think that definitely I'll be watching that episode, because it seems that these systemic problems that we're talking about is starting to hit construction really hard. And we know that that's kind of interesting because you've got rocketing mortgage rates, you've got an increase in private indebtedness, you've got the drops in salaries that are starting to kick in, as well as non-payment, which is something we're familiar with from the 90s. But all of this sounds like it's a very negative kind of feedback loop. The other challenge there, of course, is that Russia has sucked in a huge number of migrants from Central Asia, principally to work in the construction industries. There could be some really difficult social situations there when these industries start to go into serious freefall.
As for the real estate, I made a review of real estate market in Russia, and I called it "The Bubble is Bursting." Made it about a week ago. Well, I just want to give you one name, a company called Samoilov, Russia's largest real estate developer. Watch that company closely, because it's going down. Once it goes down, once it's I don't know, it's going to go to bankruptcy. It'll cause a domino effect on Russian real estate developers. And the step number two, Russian commercial banks. So the trouble is already here. It's not around the corner. It's happening right now. Shares are dropping like crazy. Samoilov shares. They just replaced the CEO. They took chief financial officer, made her CEO, fired the previous CEO. Trouble. It's perfect storm. It's all bad scenarios. It's materializing all at once at the same time, and at this point, there's not much can be done. We just wait and see. As for the migrants, this is something I don't understand, but Russia's current policy is to force migrants out of Russia as much as possible. It could be a political move, because what they're doing is they're blaming Russia's problems on migrants. And perhaps that way they're trying to blow out some steam. Russian people are getting angry because their living standard is dropping. Troubles all around, prices skyrocketing, the crime rate is going up. It's not good. It's a perfect storm. So who's guilty? Obviously, the migrants. They're the criminals. They are the cause of problems. They're taking your jobs, even though the unemployment rate is record at 2.0%, but still, it's them. It's their evil. And what are we going to do? Let's do something about it. Let's deport them. Let's keep them away from Russia. Let's not let them in. Well, the question is, who's going to work? Who's going to build your houses? Who's going to fix your plumbing? Who's going to, clean your streets? Russians? I don't think so. So the political interest is winning over business interest, but that's gonna add to troubles of Russian economy, and not in the future. It's adding now, so it's a little confusing for me.
And the last topic, and very pertinent, isn't it? Because all these things are coming to a head just as we enter the winter season. And we know that winter puts a lot more pressure on infrastructure. It puts more pressure on people's incomes because, you potentially have to spend more on food. We've seen up to 83%, I think it is, annual increase in the price of potatoes. Potatoes is far and away the one that's experiencing the highest inflation rate. But there are other staples that are also in the sort of double-digit inflation rates. So you've got the need to stay warm, the need to buy food, galloping prices, plus potentially, as we reviewed, I think one of the best episodes we've done in performance-wise was the one where we talked about wind for infrastructure last year. And indeed, those predictions came to pass. We saw, catastrophic ruptures in heating pipes and so on. This year could potentially be far worse even.
This year will be worse. First, before talking of infrastructure, I'd like to mention potatoes. In the USSR, I'm old enough to remember the old country. We always had one thing available, widely available, and fairly affordable. That's potatoes. Not the greatest quality, half rotten, half normal, but still. Potatoes were always on sale at everywhere, and we had plenty. And once you have bread, potatoes, flour, and water, you will not starve. So we never starved in the USSR, but our food was very basic and very limited, let's put it this way, but we did not starve. And potatoes were always cheap. Now, the situation is a bit different. Potatoes are becoming the staple of Russians again, of many Russians, because they can't afford other foods. I'm just going to give you an example. My mother's pension is 14,000 rubles, and she spends 7 for the utilities. She's left with 7,000 rubles for everything. Transportation, clothing, and food. 7,000 is about $70. And she can afford 700 grams of red caviar per month. And that's it, assuming she doesn't eat anything else. So just so you understand what's happening there. And there are so many people who don't make lots of money, and they start relying more and more on wheat, bread, and potatoes. And water is available, everywhere. Potatoes have gone up in price by 67%. To the point when their potatoes are becoming less affordable, less and less affordable. My question is, what are Russians going to do in the coming year, in the winter? And this is the season for potato harvesting. It's just ended at late September. It's usually time when prices for domestically grown potatoes are the cheapest, the lowest. And now this lowest price is 67 rubles or 60 plus rubles per kilo. That's just insane. 67% up from last year. So that's just something to think about and to watch. And I don't have an answer. I don't know what Russians will do. I'll be watching, monitoring, and letting you know. And then going back to the utilities, last year was pretty rough. It was not catastrophic. No one died of cold, but it was extremely rough. 27 major cities in Russia declared states of emergency because there was no water, no electricity, no heat, no plumbing for some periods of times. In Russia, summertime is the season where utility companies start getting ready for upcoming winter. And it's called подготовка к отопительному сезону, preparation to the heat season. Okay, and then that's when usually all fixings are done, services are performed, maintenance schedules, and so forth. Well, this wasn't done for the most part in Russia because the country has different priorities now, and there's less money available for the preparation to the heat season. Moreover, there was a huge crisis in the south of Russia, Rostov, Krasnodar, in I think 6 or 7 provinces of Russia. Huge crisis, no electricity. The authorities said, well, you know what? The problem is that extreme heat that south of Russia faced this summer. Well, guess what? South of Russia faces extreme heat every single summer. It's just summers in Rostov and Krasnodar are always 40 plus Celsius, okay? Extremely hot. And the power plants never failed before, but they failed this year. It shows us, it's like a little preview of what is waiting for us in the wintertime. Because everything works normal when the temperatures are not extreme, and it doesn't matter. They can be extremely low or extremely high. It's equally bad for the utilities, okay? So they certainly did not pass the test of extremely high temperatures this past summer. And I am positive that they will not pass the test of extreme low temperatures this coming winter. It's just in the summertime, people don't die of heat. They die of cold, okay, in the winter. And about a month ago in Novosibirsk, that's the capital of Siberia, the city of 3 million people, that has very rough climate, the utilities started failing. About 67 large apartment buildings, tenement blocks were left without heat and electricity. And there was not state of emergency because it didn't happen for a long time, but it did happen. So this is a little preview of what's coming in the winter. And Novosibirsk was, by the way, hit hard last winter. It was one of the hardest hit cities in terms of utility failure. And it's not even winter in Russia, and its utilities already failed. What can save Russia is extremely warm winter. There will be failures, but not extreme failures. Okay, and if Russia gets regular winter or cold winter, then we'll just we will be seeing and watching what will be happening there. We will be watching people protesting, freezing, going out to the streets, and all those not so wonderful things.
Well, I'm sure we'll pick up on that theme. We're bound to over the coming weeks and months. That's the end of this half of the episode. What we're going to do this time, because we've got another topic to talk about, we're going to put it out as a separate episode a couple of days after you've watched this one. So do watch out for it. They're on very different themes, which is why we're splitting them into two. But on the economy, I think that's one of the most detailed dives that we've had so far. I think it's very, very important. failure of the Russian economy may be one of the ways in which this war can end. I very much hope it is, because things would improve for Ukrainians, and things may even have a chance of improving for Russians only when the war ends. So this is, I think, one of the most important topics that we can potentially discuss at this time. Konstantin, your insights are always very immensely valued by myself and the audience. I'm extremely glad that you joined us today. And everybody, do tune in to the second part of this conversation in a couple of days' time.
Jonathan, thank you so very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure talking to you. It always is, and today has been an extra pleasure. Thank you.